Hello. Today we're going to be looking at a technique that I do sometimes that I don't see a lot of other people doing, which is airbrushing with contrast paints. I'm also going to be touching on a different masking technique than I usually see. Oftentimes I see people using the liquid mask, and it's fine, it works pretty well, but I actually really like silly putty for masking airbrush work, because with the liquid mask it tends to not work quite as well if you don't put it on pretty heavy. For colors today, we're going to be using Black Templar contrast paint from Citadel, Apothecary White contrast, also from Citadel, Runic Gray from Army Painter Speed Paint line, Gravelord Speed Paint, also from Army Painter, and these are the new 2.0 ones with the rattle balls and the better formulation. So to start with, I'm going to take little bits off of the silly putty and just stick it onto the model. And I find it works best with lots of little bits, and just kind of tear them off and stretch them out. And I'll speed up the application here so it doesn't take forever, but it actually works surprisingly well. And what I like about it, as opposed to liquid mask, is if you don't put the liquid mask on really heavy, it can be really difficult to get off, or it can also be really difficult to get off in weird little tight spaces, but this stuff it's not beautiful, but it does work really well, and you can just paint right on it, and then when you're done, fold it all back in on itself and use it all over again. So I'm using this Spectrum airbrush. You can really use whatever you want. I'm doing it at, I think, about 25 psi. I'm not reducing it. I'm not adding any kind of flow improver. This is just straight out of the pot. It actually works really well this way. So I'm starting off with the Gravelord, which is like a pretty neutral gray, and just hitting the bulk of it. My plan, this is kind of improvisational, but my plan is to sort of transition from the blue-gray of the Runic Gray down to the black with the Gravelord Gray kind of as a transition between the two. And then ultimately I'll dry brush it to give it nice highlights and sort of tie the whole thing together. So I like to sort of test my pattern on a paper towel first, so that I can make sure the needle's not bent and it's flowing the way I like to see it come out. Now the thing about this is you want to make sure that it's all pretty dry. And I actually overloaded it a tad here, so what I'm going to do is come back and just hit it with some air. Just blow some air on it until it dries a bit. You can kind of see here I'm not actually putting any paint on it, just trying to dry it off. So the interesting thing with contrast paints is when you're brushing them, they pool in interesting and useful ways to shade and highlight themselves, but that's really not how it works when you put it through an airbrush. It's almost more like a filter. But what's cool about it, as opposed to airbrushing normal paints, is number one, like I said, you really don't have to worry about adding flow improver or thinning it down. Like, it's basically ready to go straight out of the pot. Again, at about 25 psi, and just use it as is. Here I'm spraying on some Apothecary White. This is the first time I've sprayed any of this through an airbrush, but it works pretty well. It's actually got a little bit of color to it, doesn't it? But that's going to be my highlight in the middle. So here I'm switching back to the runic gray. As you can see, I'm just putting it straight into the gun and making sure that I've used up all that previous color, spraying it onto the paper towel there. What I really like about this is just how smooth the transitions are, because I think when you look at a lot of airbrushed models, you can tell, like, it has a certain look to it. I think unless you're using the really nasty solvent-based stuff, it just atomizes to a certain extent where it looks airbrushed. But whereas with the contrast paints or the speed paints or whatever, you know, they're all the same, but because they're transparent, the atomization doesn't seem quite as noticeable, so the transitions are way smoother. So here I'm going to take one of these makeup brushes and do a little bit of dry brush highlighting. I'm going to start with this steel gray from Vallejo. It's kind of a blue. I've got Mechanicus, standard gray, and some Celestra gray. And so I'll just be taking a tiny bit on the brush here, getting most of it off, and then even more of it off on there. And I like to sort of test it on my knuckles and see how it dry brushes onto my knuckles. And then just very light pressure, just sort of almost tickling it. Barely touching it at all. And the nice thing is with these makeup brushes is they give you much less of that scratchy look that, you know, if you're buying something for modeling, specifically for like war game modeling, you know, you'll see these dry brushes that are really stiff. They're like little brooms almost, and they work fine. I think they're very beginner friendly, but I really do like the way this looks. It still has a tiny bit of that effect, but it's much less noticeable, and it gives you a lot smoother sorts of highlights than you would otherwise get. Now, I mean, you could also do edge highlighting, or you could glaze. I mean, I like to do, this whole point of this video is I like glazing a whole lot, and I think it looks fantastic, but there's only so many hours in the day, you know, when you have a job and a family and that kind of thing. And so these little shortcuts, I think, can still leave you with a really nice looking model at the end and save a ton of time. And here we have it. It's pretty much all done. I might go back and glaze a little bit into the highlights and shadows if I feel motivated enough, but at this point I'm pretty happy with it. I've got some other examples here as well. Like here's Marnius Calgar. I did some reds and crimsons, blacks and oranges to get this effect. Same idea here, but a little less effort. And then finally, this guy, the smoke was all contrast, but the fluorescent I think was a Vallejo fluorescent. And then finally, this librarian. This is a whole different kind of thing, and I might do another video at another time. But the blue sort of highlight was also contrast paint. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and if you like what I did, please consider sharing it with somebody or giving it a like.